Wel, noswaith dda bawb. Good evening, everybody. Croeso cynnes iawn I chi I gyd I ddarlith rithiol arall gan y Comisiwn. Heno, Louise Barker fydd yn trafod Tirwedd Lechi Gogledd-orllewin Cymru, mwyn dathlu Safle Treftadaeth y Byd newydd Cymru. A very, very warm welcome to you all to this evening's lecture by Louise Barker. It's on the Slate landscape of Northwest Wales, and it's a celebration of Wales's new World Heritage Site. The lecture, you're welcome to ask any questions, and Louise will be happy to answer them. But could you please write your questions in the question and answer function? We'd be grateful if you don't use the chat for questions. They're more likely to go missing in there, so thank you. This evening's talk will be recorded and shared on other platforms. For those not watching this live, you're also welcome to send us any questions or share any comments, and Louise will reply to them as soon as possible. Ebydd y sgwrs hwn rhwng y Saesneg heno, cofiwch fod croeso I chi gysylltu â ni yn y Gymraeg, os ydych chi'n am ofyn cwestiwn neu adael sylw. Hoffwn nawr gyflwyno ein siaradwr heno, sef Louise Barker. Louise yw wch ymchwilydd archeolegol y Comisiwn Brenhinol a dath I weithio efo ni yn 2004. Byddwch chi'n ei gweld hi yn yr awyr agored yn ymgymryd ac ar arolygon ac ymchwiliadau ar safleoedd a thirweddau o bob math ac o bob cyfnod ledled Cymru. Ac mae hi hefyd yn rhan o dîm prosiect Cherish a newid hinsawdd a threftadaeth arfordirol sy'n cael ei arwain gan y Comisiwn a ei ariannu gan yr Undeb Ewropeaidd. Louise is a senior investigator at the Royal Commission, has been with us since 2004. You'll find her out and about undertaking surveys and investigations on sites and landscapes of all types and periods across Wales. And she's also part of the EU-funded Climate Change and Coastal Heritage Cherish project team, led by the Royal Commission. Yn ystod y 15 mlynedd diwethaf, mae diwydiant Lechi wedi bod rhan bwysig o waith Louise yn y Comisiwn. Bu'n gweithio gyda David Gwyn ar ein llyfr Lechi Cymru a gyhoeddwyd yn 2015, ac fel rhan o tîm a fi'n gweithio ar Enwebu'r hyn sydd bellach yn Safle Treftadaeth y Byd Tirwedd Lechi Gogledd-orllewin Cymru. Over the last 15 years, Slate has been a major focus of Louise's work at the Commission, initially working with David Gwyn towards our 2015 publication Welsh Slate, and as part of the team working on the nomination of what is now the Slate landscape of North West Wales World Heritage Site. Felly, ar hynny o eiria, drosodd I Louise.
Hello everybody. It makes me so happy to start with these pictures from the 28th of July this year, when UNESCO's World Heritage Committee formally announced the state landscape of North West Wales as a World Heritage Site. This year the committee was held over Zoom and we were live linked to the committee from the National Slate Museum. The main image here shows Lord David Wigley, chair of the nomination partnership, giving our acceptance speech. At the same time, messages of congratulations were coming in from across the world via the Zoom chat. The resulting publicity was great, making the news across the world, reaching Australia and India, together with some famous Welsh celebrities. Why is World Heritage so important? Well, put simply, there is no higher recognition of heritage. World Heritage sites are seen as places of importance to the whole of humanity, and the Slate landscape of North West Wales now sits alongside 3 others in Wales. The castle and town walls of King Edward in Gwynedd, inscribed in 1986. Southern industrial landscape, inscribed in 2000. And the Punk Saltay Aqueduct and Canal, inscribed in 2009. These stand alongside some of the most famous sites in the world, such as the Taj Mahal in India, the pyramids in Egypt, or Machu Picchu in Peru. With this talk, I want to introduce you to our new World Heritage Site, to the landscapes and monuments that comprise it, and explain why it's of world importance. So as initial scene setting, the new World Heritage Site comprises 6 areas in Gwynedd, shown in red on this map. Each area represents an exceptional example of an industrial landscape shaped by the quarrying and transport of slate and by the communities who lived and worked there. Firstly, though, I want to give you a bit of a background and explain how we got to that great moment in July. First and foremost, World Heritage cannot be achieved without a strong and committed partnership. The bid was led by Gwynedd Council in a partnership with 6 other organisations whose logos are shown here. The Royal Commission was very much part of this. We have had past experience of World Heritage bids, having previously worked on both the Pont Cyssyllte and Blaenavon nomination, and we could therefore bring our skills, experience, archive and knowledge to the process. The vision behind the bid was that it would be a significant driver for economic regeneration, but also help to protect, conserve and enhance our slate heritage. The nomination did, however, involve so many other organisations and individuals, from archaeologists to landowners, and above all else, the communities that now form part of the World Heritage Site. I'm therefore speaking on behalf of and representing the hard work of many over the years. So where did it all start? The nomination was some 12 years in development. The first milestone was making it onto the UK's World Heritage tentative list back in 2012. You need to be on this tentative list to proceed to a full nomination, and this list lasts for 10 years. Being on the list does not, however, mean that you will automatically be forwarded for nomination. There are many further stages and hoops to jump through. After 2012, the next major milestone was in 2015 in the publication of the Royal Commission's Welsh Slate, Archaeology and History of an Industry, authored by David Gwynn, and which contained much of the background to develop the bid further. I should note that David was and continues to play a very important part of the nomination partnership. I should also note that the book is available to purchase from the Royal Commission bookshop on our website. Publication of Welsh Slate provided the impetus to drive the nomination forward, and following 2015, work intensified with the full partnership forming and funding committed to the delivery of the nomination. The work involved is tremendous, and one of the major tasks is undertaking a comparative study. We know our slate landscapes are nationally important, but how do they compare on a world scale to many other stone quarrying and mining landscapes? A few examples of which are shown on these images. The obvious answer is that they are indeed some of the best in the world, but furthermore, the inscription of a stone quarrying and mining landscape was seen as filling a really recognisable gap on the current World Heritage list. In addition to the comparative study, other work included the site selection, exactly which slate landscape should be included. Exact boundaries needed to be drawn and agreed for each area, and we needed to ensure that there was protection and management mechanisms in place. We also needed to consult with all parties involved and then finally create all of the documentation needed for submission to UNESCO. This took 5 years, and finally in January 2020 our nomination was submitted by UK government. And here's an image that just shows what was the submission comprised. It was a 472-page nomination document, which in essence is a long and detailed application form. A 212-page management plan and action plan explaining how we would look after and manage our World Heritage Site. There's also electronic and paper copies of all the maps detailing the boundaries of all the areas that make up the World Heritage Site, and that was over 30 maps, as well as a raft of subsidiary information comprising study reports, gazetteers of all sites in the World Heritage Site, and an image inventory. Following submission of the nomination in January 2020, it was assessed by ICOMOS, who are the International Council on Monuments and Sites and are an advisory body to UNESCO. Due to the pandemic, we had a very nervous wait to see if Slate would be assessed during 2020 or delayed. With great relief, the assessment did take place, and this involved presentations and questioning over Zoom meetings and a 7-day visit and inspection of the nominated property by an ICOMOS assessor. The timing for this couldn't have been better, as it took place right at the end of September 2020 between the two lockdowns, but was something of an organisational challenge, as we had to ensure the safety of all and follow the strict government guidance of the time. It was an exhausting 7 days where all sites were visited and numerous presentations given. The assessor also experienced the 4 highs and lows of the wonderful Welsh weather, from a stunning day at Dyma'r Slate Quarry, seen on the left, to torrential rain and gales the day following in the Nantlle Valley, seen on the top right. And there, that's me in the red, top right, still smiling despite the rain. All this hard work was, however, well worth it, as we all know the happy end result. Okay, so moving on, I hope that gives you some background to the process of submitting a World Heritage nomination. But now let's look at why the slate landscape of North West Wales is a World Heritage Site. To become a World Heritage Site, you must meet at least one of 10 criteria outlined by UNESCO. For example, your site must represent a masterpiece of human creative genius, or bear a unique or at least exceptional testimony to a cultural tradition or to a civilization which is living or which has disappeared. Slate was nominated under 3 criteria, and in the end was inscribed under 2. These are the 2 criteria seen on this slide, and these sum up why the slate landscape of North West Wales is of world importance. Now let's take a look at these in a little bit more detail. So criterion 2 was all around about developments in architecture, and this relates to the fact that during the heyday of the industry, particularly during the 1800s, Welsh slate dominated the global market as a roofing element. Its weight to cost ratio made it worth exporting significantly on a global scale. Welsh slate has been used all over the world for buildings of all kinds. Above all else, roofing, the huge volume of terraced housing, needed to house the growing population of Britain's industrial towns and cities. A small terraced house might use 2.5 tons of Welsh slate on its roof. Wales's output in the 1800s would have covered well over 13 million such homes. Welsh slate was also used to roof prestigious architectural projects around the world. For example, the Royal Exhibition in Melbourne, Australia is roofed in Penry Quarry slate, or Mae'r slate from one of the Festiniog quarries used to roof Copenhagen City Hall. Closer to home, we also see the evidence of other slate products, the slate slab products that were used more locally in walling, flooring, lintels and fireplaces, as fences, the distinctive craiau, as gravestones, billiard tables and also urinals. The second part of criterion 2 relates to developments in technology. Technology, skilled workers and knowledge transfer from slate quarry to slate quarry was fundamental to the development of the slate industry, both at home and abroad. The ablest workers from Wales were much in demand to manage slate quarries in Canada, America, Ireland, Cornwall, Australia, Italy and Germany. And the images here show just one example of this from America. The beautiful mural at the top of this slide was painted in 1939 by Martha Levy and shows quarrymen of the New York, Vermont slate belt. It includes Welshmen Robert Cymru Williams and Robert Cymru Bach Williams, working alongside immigrants from other European cultures. On the left is the Stateville Cemetery in Pennsylvania, where a number of the gravestones are inscribed in Welsh and commemorate the immigrants who arrived to work in the local slate industry. On the right is a cottage from Coulson Town, Pennsylvania, a typical Welsh cottage built in America, showing how Welsh migrants brought their own architectural forms with them. But above all else, it was railway building, the narrow gauge railways of the Welsh slate industry, that had the biggest impact in the world. Developing out of the South Wales Iron Railroads, the starting point in the slate industry was the Penry Railroad of 1801, which led to the most significant, the Festiniog Railway, seen here near Tanygrishiau. This opened for horse and gravity operation in 1836 and steam from 1863, and today operates as a heritage railway. The Ffestiniog Railway's ingenious use of topography in a challenging mountainous environment was imitated worldwide. For example, it inspired the Darjeeling Himalayan Railway, which has been a World Heritage Site since 1999. This uses distinctive locomotives contemporary with those used in the slate industry, small but powerful and ideal for working sharp curves and steep gradients needed to operate in mountainous environments. The exploitation of Wales's natural resources lies at the heart of Criterion 4, the transformation of this largely agricultural landscape through stone quarrying and mining during the Industrial Revolution. The largest deposits of high-quality slate in the world lay in Gwynedd, the Cambrian purple slate vein and the Ordovician slate vein, shown in yellow on the map. This was exploited on a monumental scale, the dip of the slate vein dictating how the slate was quarried, for example, steps on the mountainside, in pits on the valley floor, or through mining underground. The World Heritage Site showcases all of these methods, as seen in this collection of images. This is also an area of high rainfall, and where captured, water provided low-cost energy in the form of water power. The size of Wales also meant that the quarries lay within a relatively short distance to the sea or railway network, a factor crucial to commercial success. All these factors helped transform what was previously a largely rural landscape into an industrial landscape on a monumental scale. Wherever we find slate quarries and mines, we will also find the transport systems which conveyed the finished product, winding their way across mountains and along valleys, and the settlements where the workforce lived. These three elements are what makes the landscape, and what makes this a World Heritage landscape is its survival and the way in which we can easily see and understand the relationships between the elements. This wonderful aerial view of the Ffestiniog landscape encapsulates this. We have the quarries on the edge of the image, overlooking the town of Blaenau Ffestiniog, created to house the workforce. Then running all the way along the Vale of Ffestiniog, along the edge of the mountains, is the Ffestiniog Railway, which conveyed the finished slate products to Porthmadog Harbour in the far distance. The World Heritage Site celebrates the heyday of the slate industry between 1780 and 1940, when Wales dominated world production. But the origins of the industry are much earlier, and it also has a history after 1940. The earliest evidence for slate quarrying and export comes from Roman military buildings, such as Segontium Roman fort in Carnarvon. And in the medieval period, slates were also quarried for local use and for export to Ireland and to Western England to roof castles and palaces. But it is the heyday of the industry between 1780 to 1940 that had the worldwide impact. During this period, the industry is capitalised and becomes the largest slate producer in the world. Slates were exported to nearly every continent. The industry peaked in the last few decades of the 1800s, with employment reaching around 16,000 men and production some 500,000 tonnes a year. During this period, hundreds of quarries are opened across Wales. Gwynedd was the heartland, but there are also an industry in other counties, from Conwy, Wrexham, Powys, Ceredigion and Pembrokeshire. Today, active extraction, tipping, processing and secondary working continues, but on a much reduced scale. Penry Slate Quarry is just one example, supplying high quality slate, including those for important conservation projects across the world. So I'm going to move on now to take a look at each of the landscapes and sites and monuments that make up the new World Heritage Site. A map of the areas and some of the key monuments within each one are shown here. One of the most often asked questions is, with so many slate quarries in Wales, how were the 6 areas that make up the World Heritage Site chosen? Well, Gwynedd was chosen as it represents the heartland of the slate industry in Wales. About 90% of Welsh output came from Gwynedd, And it was here during the industry's heyday that the most productive quarries were located and where the distinctive technologies like the narrow gauge railway were developed. Of the 6 areas chosen, all represent a complete landscape: the quarry, the transport, and the associated settlements. They are the best surviving examples, the most authentic, and ones which best fulfill the 2 criteria noted earlier. In other words, they showcase different forms of quarrying, the development of transport routes from roads, rivers to railways, and different forms of settlement, from the lavish houses of the wealthy owners to the communities which sprang up to house the workmen and their families. There are also other important management considerations. For example, only historic quarry workings form part of the World Heritage Site. Quarries with existing mineral permissions and areas where landowners foresaw future extraction were excluded. But that's not to say that other slate areas aren't important, far from it, and the hope is that these areas will also gain benefit from the status and can share in telling the story of the industry in Wales. So I'm going to start my tour of the new Slate World Heritage Site in Area 1, Penryn Slate Quarry in Bethesda and the Ogwen Valley to Port Penryn. This part of the World Heritage Site encompasses a 9-kilometre-long industrial landscape through the Ogwen Valley. It is a slate quarrying landscape that was developed directly by its aristocratic owners and represents the first area of the slate industry of North West Wales to be extensively capitalised for global markets. Here we also see the entire process flow of the industry, from quarry face to export harbour, and 3 contrasting forms of settlement. Penryn Castle and Park was the Welsh home of the Pennant family, the aristocratic dynasty that owned and developed this slate landscape, and whose funding wealth in the late 1700s came from their sugar-growing estates in Jamaica, worked by enslaved labour. This fortune was invested here, and the wealth available is evident in the scale and form of the quarry workings, as well as through the introduction of innovative methods and technologies which other slate-producing areas in the region sought to emulate. For example, at Penryn Quarry, Pennant's engineers developed a system of regular stepped benches or galleries to work the rock face, with the waste rock chips fed by railway lines. By the early 19th century, this was the largest slate quarry in the world. The quarry also led the way in the application of water power, and this part of the World Heritage Site is remarkable for its rare variety of surviving water-driven machinery. At Penryn Quarry, 2 water-balanced shafts survive, superseding the earlier incline systems. These were used to raise slate and waste rock from the quarry pit. And underground, a water pressure engine was installed in 1872 to pump water from the quarry pit up to the main drainage level. Adjacent to the quarry lies Felinfawr, the site of an innovative slate slab mill of 1802, the earliest known location in the world to have used circular saws to cut stone. Here, water powered the quarry's processing and engineering complex, and 2 19th century water wheels survive, one which powered the slate slab mills and the other the foundry. For transporting the finished slate product, the Penryn Slate Quarry built a 0.6 metre gauge iron railroad, which was the design ancestor of many narrow gauge railways built subsequently. This used horse traction along lightly graded sections and counterbalanced inclines to connect the quarry with Port Penryn. Features along it, such as the Kegging Bridge and the Pont Macoggy on the Incline Winding House, now a home, are amongst the earliest upstanding railway structures in the world. In the 1870s, Charles Easton Spooner of the Festiniog Railway designed the steam-powered replacement, which operated until 1962. The end point was Port Penryn on the Menai Straits, the main shipping point for Penryn slate from the late 1700s to the mid-1900s. It continues in use today as a commercial harbour. Two contrasting forms of settlement also form part of this landscape. A planned settlement with accompanying land, stylised cottages and houses were built for workers by the controlling hand of the Penry estate in 1843 at Mynydlandygai. These contrast with Bethesda village, initially created on freehold land by independent-minded quarrymen and their families who preferred not to live on the Penry estate. Here the irregular and winding streets and plainer dwellings contrast with the later, more orderly expansion of the village onto Penry estate land. So moving on, Area 2 of the World Heritage Site is set within the breathtaking landscape of Wales's highest mountain, Snowdon, Wyddfa. It is dominated by the spectacular galleried rock faces, inclined planes and tips of the Dyma'r slate quarry, once the second largest quarry in the world, just missing out on the title by its neighbour. Dyma'r was worked between 1787 and 1969, and like Penryn, the wealth of an aristocratic landowner underpinned development of the quarry. In this instance, the Asherton-Smith family of the Vaynol estate. Dyma'r quarry contains over 30 galleries for processing the quarried slate, each linked to a rubble tip. Each is also linked to one of the counterbalance incline railway systems that are a key feature of the quarry. These transported the finished slate products down the mountain, the weight of loaded wagons heading down the mountain, pulling back up the mountain the empty wagons ready to be refilled. At Vivian Quarry, a separate department of the Dyma'r quarry, part of its incline has been restored to full working order, and this can be seen in the right-hand image. After closure in 1969, the site was soon purchased by a company which went on to develop a hydroelectricity scheme here. This meant that almost all structures survived. The Australia Gallery, with its huge mill building complete with saw tables, along with its electrically powered equipment dating from the 1920s, is a good example of such survival. Outside of the quarry, a remarkable feature is the quadrangular engineering complex that served the quarry, known as Gilfach. It is now the home of the National Slate Museum. The complex was built in 1870, and all the machinery throughout the building was at one time powered by an enormous water wheel, some 50 feet in diameter. Today it is the largest surviving water wheel on the British mainland and still operates. The housing enclosing this wheel can be seen here behind the main quadrangular building. The best preserved slate hospital in the industry is also a feature of this slate landscape. It is prominently located so that no one could miss the benign intent of the owning estate. The Dyma'r Slate Quarry Hospital was built in the 1860s and was at the forefront of medical care for injured workmen. It is one of the 3 hospitals established in the Welsh slate industry, all of which are included in the World Heritage Site, and is today also a museum run by Gwynedd Council, with much of its early medical equipment on display. The workforce lived in cottages built on mountain common land, seen in the top left of this image, and in the nearby villages of Gnolin and Clwtebont. Men were also provided with weekly accommodation at the Anglesey Barracks, built in the early 1870s adjacent to the operational area of Dyma'r Quarry. These were for workmen who lived too far away to commute daily, such as from Anglesey. A bedroom in each unit had space for 4 men, and these were in use until 1937, when they were condemned. And finally, in relation to the transport element of this landscape, here we see a full range in development, all of which can be traced as relic features or continue in use today as roads and as a tourist railway. Originally, a network of purpose-built roads was used for transporting slate. These led down to the shores of Llyn, from where they were taken by boat. Later roads also led to the tidal harbour on the Menai Straits. In In 1825, the quarry's first railroad was opened, inspired by Penry Quarry's 1801 railroad. Then, in the 1840s, a far more sophisticated railway was opened, running along the shores of Llyn Padan. This was the first of the Slate quarry railways to use steam locomotives. So moving on to Area 3. This takes us further south in Gwynedd to the Nantlle Valley landscape, a contrast to the mountainous terrain of the two areas I've just described. Here, ownership was also very different. Quarries belonged to many different landowners and therefore developed as many separate quarries, the boundaries between which much of the older rural landscape survived, clearly showcasing the transition from a traditional agricultural economy to an industrial society. Here, geology and topography meant that slate deposits could only be opened out of pits, now water-filled and up to 150 metres deep. As a result, ingenious methods were employed to raise blocks and rubble, as well as to pump water out of the deep, confined workings. At Penry and Dorothea quarries, local engineers developed chain incline ropeways to raise and lower slate trucks, running from the pit bottoms to massive slate bastions. The left-hand image shows the slate bastion towering over the Dorothea pit, and it is also shown in this beautiful painting of 1850, which also shows how both water and steam power were in use in the quarry. At the adjacent quarries of Blaenau and Penrhyn Orsedd, steam and electrically powered aerial ropeway systems were later used, a technology imported from stone quarries of Scotland known as Blondins, after the famous tightrope walker Charles Blondin. Dewatering of the quarry pits was essential in Nantlle, and here technology imported from the metal mines of Devon and Cornwall was used. This included a flat rod pumping system driven by water wheels, and at Dorothea, one of the gems of the World Heritage Site, the Cornish beam engine used from 1906 until 1951. The engine, still in its original roofed engine house, was one of the last such engines ever manufactured by the Holman brothers of Camborne, and is one of only 16 to survive worldwide, but the only one to survive with its original boilers. The tide of settlement brought about by the expansion of the quarries is evident in many forms, from the adaptation of an earlier farmhouse and farm buildings into managers' houses and barracks for both quarrymen and their families. It is also in the expansion of settlement from the scattered cottages and field plots on the mountain common at Cilgwyn, enclosed without any legal authority from the 1798. And the planned small village of Nantlle, developed from the 1860s to the 1890s by Penrhyn Orsedd Quarry. This beautiful image shows the horse-worked Nantlle Railway, with Prince and Corwin pulling slate wagons from Penrhyn Orsedd Quarry. The railway served the valley's slate quarries and opened in 1828, operating with relatively little change until 1963. It was the first public railway in the slate industry, built with Liverpool finance and with the advice of the famous Stephenson family of railway engineers. It survives as a relic feature through this World Heritage area. Area 4 encompasses the remote upland valleys of Cwmpenad and Cwmystradlin in the Snowdonia National Park, and confession time for me, my favourite part of the World Heritage Site. Both the Gorseddau and Prince of Wales quarries were developed between 1850 and 1870, the golden age of the slate industry in Gwynedd. Their development testifies to the fact that everyone that invested in the slate industry expected to make a fortune. Huge sums of money were invested in these two quarries from 1850 onwards, but both failed within a few years of opening because of the poor quality of their rock. However, what's not good for shareholders is good for World Heritage, as the lack of later quarrying means features and evidence of working practices from this date in time survives. These really are a perfect time capsule, Each quarry is set in a stunning landscape setting, the Prince of Wales literally clinging to the mountainsides. Both contain their blast shelters, slate makers' shelters known as gwaliau, the barracks, the offices, a smithy, and a quarry manager's house. At Gorffennaf, we also have the often talked about feature, an exceptionally impressive core-walled retaining wall, which protected the quarry's railway from the waste tips beside it. Both quarries were connected by railway to the sea at Porthmadog, and both had water-powered slate slab mills. All these elements are included in the World Heritage boundary. The three-storied Ynysapandi Mill, which served Gorffennaf Quarry, is one of the most iconic monuments of the industry, though totally untypical of it. It is grand and architecturally ambitious, and is quite unlike most slate mills. It is thought to be based on a railway workshop or foundry, and its designer, James Brunlees, seems to have given little thought to how the structure would operate, and it was left to local contractors to work out how to equip the building. A curved embankment seen to the right of the building carried raw blocks in and the finished products away from the mill and connected to the Gorffennaf Railway. In stark contrast, the Prince of Wales Mill is a single-storey structure and is far more practical for manoeuvring and processing large blocks of stone. It was built in 1864 and shows an interchange of techniques with Penryn Quarry, where its designers, John Francis, the Penryn manager, and his son, also remodelled the Felinfawr slate slab mill. Its water supply was carried from a reservoir in a wooden trough on a row of stone pillars that you can see leading up to the mill building on this image. Running from the mill, you can also see the route of the grandly named Gorffennaf Junction and Porthmadog railways, which transported the slate out of the valley. Accommodation for workers was an essential feature given this remote upland location. Barracks are present at both quarries. The barracks at Prince of Wales, seen here, are a row of three-room single-storey cottages. Barracks generally provided crowded, unhygienic and uncomfortable accommodation, and it's very sobering to think of Prince of Wales Quarry's 4 cottages housing much of its workforce, around 200 men at its height. Perhaps the most remarkable settlement in this area is Treforys, just west of Gorffennaf Quarry. It was built in 1857 as a company village for quarry workers and their families. It had 18 pairs of 2-room cottages arranged along 3 streets, as seen on the aerial image on the left. Its ground plan was evidently drawn up in an office because it was laid out without almost total disregard of the rugged, bogged and uneven landscape. It must have been a challenging place to live and suffered an outbreak of smallpox in 1859. It was abandoned when Gorffennaf Quarry closed a few years later. As with the Penryn slate landscape, Area 5 encapsulates the entire process flow of the industry from the 5 quarries that form part of the Festiniog landscape, all owned by different companies, to the export harbour at Porthmadog. Here we also see a different quarrying technique. The angle of the slate vein meant that the most convenient method for quarrying slate was to work it underground. Slate rock that was not good enough to be split and trimmed into roofing slates would be discarded, forming huge waste tips, a distinctive feature of any slate quarry. Up to 90% of the rock extracted was usually classified as waste. Beneath the Festiniog landscape lie over 100 kilometres of levels, tunnels and spectacular honeycomb chambers, where in many cases machinery, complete inclined planes and railway systems survive. The underground workings also preserve smaller artefacts such as boots, newspapers and cigarette packets. The Festiniog quarries used different forms of power to operate the uphaulage inclines bringing the slate blocks to the surface, and at the mills which process the blocks into roofing slates. At Mae'r, the well-preserved late 19th century mill was originally powered by water. At the neighbouring Dyfwys quarry, where water was scarce, steam had to be used. The earliest phases of this mill dates to the late 1850s, and it represents one of the earliest integrated mills in the industry. Here, all the processes for producing roofing slates were carried out in one place. The traditional hand-splitting gwaliau were integrated with the powered machinery used in the initial reduction of the slate blocks. And at Leckweth Quarry, electricity was generated at Panta Avon Power Station. This is a rare example of an early 20th century hydroelectric power station. In 1873, the town of Blaenau Ffestiniog was described as Dyma'r Llechi, Slate City, as it was the largest town in the slate quarrying area. The town of Blaenau Ffestiniog was enriched with shops, pubs, a market hall, shown on the image in the bottom right, and a reading room. And it is the most urban of the slate quarrying settlements in the World Heritage Site, offering housing for the workmen as well as the middle classes and quarry managers. In contrast to many of the areas, there was no landed estate influence here, and it developed around a network of railways and roads. It grew because of the constant stream of people coming here from 1820 onwards to live and work. Almost 12,000 people lived here by the 1880s. At this point, I want to take a quick tangent and talk very briefly about the culture and people of the slate industry. World Heritage Site status is attached to the monuments that make up the site, all those features I've been covering in this second part of the presentation. Through these monuments, we can add the human story about the people that worked and lived here and continue to live and work here today. This is where the important story of the Welsh language and culture shines through. The workforce for the industry was overwhelmingly local, sourced from the surrounding hinterlands, and that is the crucial factor in why the slate landscape of North West Wales retained and retains its distinctive way of life and minority language. So often, marginal cultures that are incorporated into a global industrial system lose this. We can tell this story through the place names, through features such as the caban where quarrymen took their breaks, through events such as the Penryn strike, and most of all, through the chapel. Wales's religious identity and the powerful tradition of religious dissent is evident in numerous chapels across the World Heritage Site. At various points, there were 40 alone in Blaenau Ffestiniog. The chapel is a building which characterises the Welsh landscape and is central to the slate community's vision of themselves as well as to their values. Chapels identified with the Liberal Party and ultimately the Labour movement. They offered visionary sermons, a ministry drawn from the people themselves, and an opportunity to organise and express the community's own values. Just some of the chapels within the World Heritage Site are shown in the photographs on this slide. So returning now on our journey through the Ffestiniog landscape. Initially, slates from the Ffestiniog quarries were transported by pack horse and cart to river quays, such as this surviving one at Tyddyn Isa on the Druid River. Here, slates were loaded into boats and then transferred to ships in Porthmadog, where a sea embankment had scoured a channel. Locally built schooners, famous for their beauty and their turn of speed, braved the North Sea and the Atlantic. The Frau Minna Pettersson is just one example. It was owned by Hugh Parry of Porthmadog, and its name reflects the slate trading links between North West Wales and Hamburg. Many of the 19th century shipwrecks dotted along the coast of Wales undoubtedly relate to the slate industry, and occasionally the odd piece of slate cargo is also found. In 1836, the opening of the Ffestiniog Railway gave the quarries access to Porthmadog. The railway was skillfully engineered so wagons could travel by gravity on a downward gradient with horses to haul them back. In 1863, steam locomotives were introduced, the final stretch of the journey crossing the Cobb Sea defence of 1808 to 1811, shown on the right-hand image. The quays at Porthmadog at the top of this, the right-hand image, were built between 1824 and 1867. And the ballast bank seen at the top left of the right-hand image is made up of stones discarded as ballast from slate ships returning without a cargo. So we've made it to our final slate area of the World Heritage Site. Our final area is located in the Dysunny Valley in South Gwynedd and is the most southerly area of the World Heritage Site. This area demonstrates the transfer of knowledge, technology and people from other areas within the World Heritage Site, and also the inward investment of wealth from a major English industry, Lancashire cotton, which created the landscape we see today. Bryneglois Quarry was first opened in the 1840s, though its boom years came 20 years later. Here, both slate slabs and roofing slates were produced from two veins of Ordovician slate. The most prominent visible surviving feature of the quarry is the bastion for a chain incline ropeway system and the pits for the water wheels which powered it, shown here on the right. This was a technology brought to the quarry by men from the Nantla Valley. Once the shallow surface open pits had reached a certain depth, the narrow slate vein had to be worked underground. Several of the 7 floors containing rail wagons and winches. These floors connected with the open pit from which the chain incline system raised blocks and slate rubble. The village of Abergynolwyn that houses the quarry workforce was developed following the lease of the quarry by the McConnell brothers, Lancashire cotton spinners, in the 1860s. Many of the houses are built to a design by Manchester architect James Stephen. This is why the village looks as if it's been transplanted here from a mill town in northwest England. And finally, it's always good to end on a steam train. The Talisland Railway, completed in 1866, joins Bryneglois Quarry and the village of Abergynolwyn to Tywyn, and served both the quarry and public. Though Tywyn is next to the sea, the railway was built to connect with the National Railway network and was the first to do so in northwest Wales. It continued to run until 1950, when it was threatened with closure due to the death of its owner. A band of enthusiasts formed the Talisland Railway Preservation Society, and they took over running the line in 1951. They have been operating it ever since. It is the world's first preserved railway and also the inspiration behind the Scarloy Railway in the fictional children's books and television series Thomas the Tank Engine and Friends. So that's it from me. I hope that's not been too much of a whirlwind tour, and I hope that has given you a good overview of the new World Heritage Site. Here's a few website addresses you might find useful. The new World Heritage website, www.lechi.cymru. If you look on the Slate area section, you'll find links to some lovely films about each area and also information on which parts of the World Heritage Site are accessible and open to the public. For all the official documentation, including copies of the nomination documents and management plan, visit the UNESCO World Heritage Site and the Slate landscape in the list of properties. Finally, our own online resource, Covline, has lots more information in images about all the wonderful sites mentioned today, as well as other slate quarries and landscapes outside of the World Heritage Site. Thank you.
Diolch yn fawr, Louise. Thank you very much for that very interesting talk. We've received a couple of questions that I can fire at you. First of all, congratulations on the World Heritage Site listing, and thank you for a wonderful talk. Are there any statistics on the then prevailing mortality rates in the industry due to things like silicosis and injury?
Yes, I believe there are. I don't have them, unfortunately. It's certainly not an area of my expertise, but the hospitals and also injury and health was dealt with in the nomination dossier. And there's a couple of people who would be able to answer that. The National Slate Museum would be able to help, and also Lord Wigley. And I think if you were to go onto the World Heritage website, onto their YouTube channel, you'll find a talk by him about the quarrymen and those statistics. But if not, do email me and I will be able to put you in contact with the right people.
Okay, great. Thanks, Stephen, for that question. We've got a question from Becky. It says, "What difference will being a World Heritage area have on the sites?"
There's numerous differences, really. Number one, it certainly raises awareness and also hopefully brings in new funding streams that will actually help the site or help in the conservation of sites and also on the buildings. And it will also help broaden the story, put it onto a world scale. You know, tourism is a major thing these days, and it will bring in tourists from around the world, and we'll be able to link the whole story of the slate industry from numerous different sites around the World Heritage property.
Thanks. Becky's got another question. Are there any plans or intentions to preserve any of the buildings and structures at any other sites?
I think the short answer to that is definitely yes. Obviously, the nomination to become a World Heritage Site comes with it a lot of the management and the action plans related to that. So all sites have their own sort of management, so local management plans that detail all of the particularities of that site, and also creates an audit of the preservation and how the sites are, and also focuses on the long term for each site. What will happen, which ones can be conserved, which ones is best to be conserved. And so there's a whole raft of different management options out there for sites, and certainly some will definitely benefit from the World Heritage status and will aid conservation going forwards.
Thanks, Louise. And then the next question is from Judith, who says, "Mlynedd Llanfiguy, looks as if there was a large amount of land to go with the houses, more than I would have expected. If you've got any information about this?"
I don't have any specific information about that, but what you'll find in the industry, certainly in the earlier days, is that as the industry was developing, a lot of the houses, they always came with smaller bits of land. It's almost like a sort of quarry cottager settlements in many ways. So there was still some kind of a small holdings that people could continue in their agricultural way of life. Now that might have been something and in the background to that, and going forward in the way that the estates were given much larger plots of land going forwards.
Thank you. And the next question is from Gwyl, who says, "Is anything being done to maintain buildings like Ynys It's a shame if it slowly crumbles away."
There has been conservation at Ynys, so it's owned by the National Park and looked after by the National Park. And I know that I've spoken about the management plans for all of these properties, so I know that there'll be maintenance and improved interpretation, and the mill will continue to be looked after. It's an iconic site, and we know that, and it's an integral part of the World Heritage Site, so very confident that it will be looked after.
Okay, thank you very much. We've got a question in Welsh now. Dangoswydd yn gynnar yn y ddarlith wych tren bach yn ddefnyddio dyfeision sef troi yn ôl arno ein hunan. I think that means you showed earlier in the lecture little train that uses a device to turn itself around. Have you got any more information about that?
I don't know if that related to the Himalayan slide, possibly. It was the I think it was, is it called Agony Curve or something? It's a huge gradient loop used on the railway, which is remarkably similar to a later loop that's actually was created in more recent times on the Festiniog Railway, and it's a way of going uphill over a lesser gradient. So it's just taking in an extra long loop to take the journey uphill. So it's just a longer way of making up the gradient, knowing that the engine is going to be able to do that.
Okay. Diolch yn fawr, yn cwestiwn arall gan yn Gymraeg, un diwedd arall Festiniog oedd neu in India. So I think if you answered that question, it was from the photograph, the one in India. And then Dylan says, one aspect of Slate heritage is sometimes overlooked is the existence of thousands of poems, which are mostly in Welsh, inscribed into slate gravestones throughout the area. Some cemeteries are in effect poetic anthologies with a number of poems running into 3 figures. Although efforts have been made to collect them all, many have still not been transcribed. This could be a fascinating project in the context of the new UNESCO status.
It certainly does sound very interesting, and I'd really like to hear more about that. We see the sort of the poetry, the Eisteddfod, the singing. It's all part of the culture of the Corryman, and more evidence of that we can gather and showcase, the better. So it does sound a wonderful project.
And a question from Sue: are you linking with the Slate Trail? There's a fantastic 85-mile route starting in Port Penryn.
Yes, well, obviously part of the large parts of the Slate Trail are in the World Heritage Site, and so certainly if you're going from Port Penryn up to Penryn Quarry, it's all part of the World Heritage Site. There are obviously exhibition notices and panels along there that showcases that. And I know that the Gwynedd Council will be working closely with those on the Slate Path to use that as a way for people, as a sustainable way really, for people to see the industry, whether on bicycle or on foot. So it's a wonderful resource to have that loops through both the World Heritage Site and other sites of the Slate landscape that aren't part of the World Heritage Site. So absolutely.
Great. Okay. Thanks, Lou. There's another question from Ray, which is about the slate quality and colours that I'm sure lots of us see as we're going across Wales, the different slate colours. So is there any information on slate quality and colours across these sites?
Yeah, you can. Some of the slates are quite distinctive in their colour. So I think I'm thinking this is from memory now. I think if you see some of the greener style slates you sometimes see are usually identified as coming from the Nantler landscape, and the more of the purples and blues generally come from the different veins that perhaps relate more to Penryn and Dinorwig. There are people out there, certainly at the National Museum, who are very good at identifying the slates and some of the colours of the slates, and that's an ongoing project. It can be quite hard though, but it usually relates to the different veins. So certainly the finest qualities were definitely from the sites that are included in the World Heritage Site, aside from obviously the one area which I mentioned, which was very short-lived because of its poor quality slates. And moreover, you see not so much in well, a little bit in the UK, but more aboard the beautiful kind of slate roofing that you get, where different slates are brought in from different areas to give that different colours to create the wonderful patterned roofs that you sometimes see.
Thanks very much. And I think we're almost getting to the end of the questions now. There's a couple more. There's one, Alan comments that one of the galleries at Vivian Quarry recently collapsed. And it closed access to it. Dorothea and Dinorwig are certainly crumbling in the same way. And are there plans for the galleries to be shored for preservation?
I don't know exactly the answer to that, of whether they will be, but I think that would be a major undertaking, and something that we probably can't prevent. Certainly going forward, if you look at perhaps some of the impacts of a changing climate, and perhaps with increased rainfall and such like, is actually going to become quite problematic to some of these areas, which are quite fragile rocks. And the quarry pits and the rock faces by nature are always were utilised and chopped away. So I don't know exactly for that. I'm sure there will be going forward within the management plan, looking at all the risks to these sites, ways to hopefully conserve and preserve as much as we possibly can.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Got an interesting comment from Mike H. Mike lives in Philadelphia, 75 miles away from the Bangor, Pennsylvania, in the Slate Belt. And he comments that the Welsh immigrants worked on this, and says, "I'm sure you're aware of this," and he's not yet visited. So thanks for that, Mike.
Yeah, we
international audience.
Yeah, I mentioned very early on that we had a comparative study. You have to do that to ascertain, where the Welsh slate quarries stand around slate quarrying across the world. And obviously there's very close links and ties with the American slate belt there. And hopefully, the World Heritage status will bring closer links to those other slate quarrying areas around the world. And it will be really interesting to look at those links going forward. And we know certainly with the so many Welsh quarrymen went to work in these quarries around the world. So it would be definitely very good to follow that up.
Thank you very much. And we've arrived at what I think is the last question. And it's about the World Heritage Site itself. And John asks, I wonder why the quarry remains just over the border into Conwy above Cwm Penmachno were excluded from the World Heritage Site. They're connected by railway to the Blaenau Festiniog system.
Very true. And it's obviously a question that we've had on a number of occasions. This one's a very case and example because it is so close, and the sort of Rubach tramway forms, from that quarry formed part of the system and came into this area for the transport of their slate. I think the simple answer there is the parameters around which the World Heritage Site was chosen, and at that time it really was just chosen that it was going to be sites within Gwynedd, and that was probably more important in relation to the management of the World Heritage Site and actually the delivery of a World Heritage nomination, having partners that were committed. Gwynedd Council was very committed, but to do it's almost a trans-county border World Heritage Site is a very, very much different undertaking. So there were some difficult decisions that had to be made on some of those kind of questions and the logistics of how to deliver a World Heritage Site.
Excellent, thanks Louise. And that looks like all the questions. So diolch yn fawr I ti unwaith eto am sgwrs gwych ac ateb y holl cwestiynau. If anybody's got any further questions, you're more than welcome to contact us after the talk, and you can do that either through social media or by using the contact details on our website. Thank you all for joining us tonight, and thanks to the Commission staff who's been involved with the arrangements, and of course to Louise for a fascinating talk. Nos da, diolch yn fawr.